Good morning. You're listening to Children Come First, WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski. We are here every week, Tuesdays from 10 to 11 a.m. And we have today with us Emanuel Pariser. Good morning, Emanuel.
Hi, Daria.
And you are located where?
I am right now sitting in my home office in Lincolnville, Maine, but the school that I'm a co-director of is in Camden, Maine, right on the coast.
And the name of the school is the Community School in Maine?
The community school, yes.
We have Emanuel on today because he does something quite unusual with children. He is an advocate for adolescents at risk who have dropped out of school. He also he's an outreach worker with not only at-risk students, but also teen parents. He's the founder of Maine's Alternative Education Association. He was appointed to the Maine Board of Students at Risk. He's done legislation for dropout and alternative programs and truancy. He's also chair of Substance Abuse Commission, and he's the author of Changing Lives, Voices from a School That Works. Emanuel, we'd like to talk about some of the students that you work with, and let's talk about the school, for example, the community school in Maine. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. The school is a very unique program. We haven't really run into any other programs quite formed like the community school. It's got two parts to it. There's a 6-month residency program, and that's been going since 1973, where students from the age of 16 to 20 who have dropped out of high school come and live with us, 8 students at a time, and they have a crack at getting their high school diploma. We're a state-approved school, a private program, and they can complete their high school diploma in that 6-month period of time, regardless of their previous performance. So it's very enticing to kids who never thought they were going to have a chance to even finish school. And the other portion of it, which started about 5 years ago, was our Passages program for teen parents, and we actually go and visit the students in their homes and teach them right there in their kitchen or wherever there's some space to do that once a week, and give them classes that they have to work on in between so that they can continue to be with their children. I think that it's strange, but it's true that in our area, even near the Millennium, there isn't one high school that has a daycare program for kids. So that if you drop out of school and you have a kid, unless you have your own means of getting that kid to a daycare program, you're out of school automatically. So that's just a very little snapshot.
Now, in this 6 months residency program, I have 2 questions. One, why do they have to be residents? And 2, do they get a GED? Do they get a high school diploma?
Okay, I'll start with the second one. We had Maine's a great state. I'm sure Pennsylvania's a great state too, but I have to sing the praises. And it's very small, and the people in the state government are looking at things from that point of view. We had the good fortune of working with somebody at the State Department of Education who saw that we were reaching out to a group of kids that basically had been left by the wayside by traditional education in a lot of ways. And she helped us to craft a diploma program which involved kids taking competency tests similar to the GED, but not the GED, although we started taking the GED. Now we give our own competency tests. And joining that with a number of requirements that we ask students to complete, such as they have to pay room and board, they have to hold a 28-hour job as a minimum, and a number of other things. They have to take a number of responsible roles within the community at the school. And that's why it's residential, because we really want our school to prepare our students for the real world. We feel like it's as much a part of the real world as it can be, and you can't do that on as easily on a non-residential basis. One other thing too is that because students come to live with us, it gives them whole new chance to start a new set of relationships with people that don't necessarily have been pegged as a certain kind of person or have some preconceptions about who they are. So they get a fresh start, and we're interested and supportive of them in that. That's another reason why it's residential. And I guess there's another reason too, which is that they, when a term is really working well, when the 8 students there are clicking with each other, they really support each other in what's probably one of their first major successes in their entire lives. Even though they're teenagers, they haven't had a lot of successes before coming to the school.
Now, there are only 8 students in the whole school? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, in the residential program there are 8 students at a time,
So the Community School of Maine has 8 students.
It has 8 students in that program and 26 students in our teen parent program, which we call Passages. So
Okay, so there's 30 students in the whole school.
34, but in the course of a year, actually, that works out to 42. And then we also do work with through our outreach program with students that have either dropped out of our school or students that did not complete their requirements in the 6 months, and with graduates that have graduated since 1973. And we're in touch with lots and lots of people that have been at the school who continue to use us as a sounding board. In some ways, you could look at the school, particularly for the kids in the residential program, as a set of extended relatives that they have kind of discovered, and we continue to get used as such for many, many years after somebody leaves.
Now, how are you funded?
Well, that's always been a very difficult task. Our culture doesn't really want to invest in kids. I think many people would prefer to scapegoat our teenagers and look at them as the cause of lots of problems that we know clearly that they're not. And so the residential program actually is quite a costly program. It costs about $17,000 in cost for somebody to go through a 6-month term. And the way that we fund that is that we have one government grant through the Office of Substance Abuse that has been funding us for many, many years and been tremendously supportive of our program as a preventive program. And they cover about a little bit less than a third of the costs of the program. The students have to put money in themselves from their jobs. Parents pay a tuition on a sliding scale. And we have to do quite a lot of fundraising every year. We have to raise between $60,000 and $100,000 to provide scholarship money for students. Most of our students are low income, and there are some middle income students, but none of them can pay the full freight, basically.
Now, that's extraordinary in terms of a small percentage of children. So you get that. If you had more money, would you be able to take more children in? If you were funded a little more substantially?
What we would probably do, the program that we could expand most easily would be the teen parent program, because that doesn't have a residential aspect of it. I think that in terms of, the teen parent program, the residential program, we wouldn't want to make it any larger, just because one of the things that it's working on is that small, intimate framework where everybody knows everybody else. The teachers sleep over at our school, so teachers and students really get to know each other as whole human beings, as opposed to kind of roles that sometimes get very one-dimensional in a traditional system, where nobody has the time to really get to know the people that they're learning with. So if we were better funded, I think what we would do is we'd be able to offer more money in scholarships. We'd be able to spend less time doing fundraising, and probably would work very hard on helping other people start similar programs. That would kind of be the next step for us.
Now, can you talk a little bit about your relational education, what that is? Sure.
One of the things that we really started the school with, I think it was more of a sensibility that Dora Levow, who co-founded the school with me and co-directs the school with me, really felt was important was that idea that that nobody in our program would feel kind of like a brick in the wall, to take a quote from the Pink Floyd song, "We Don't Need No Education," which in case I think if any of your listeners want to find out exactly how many kids in school feel today, even though it's an old song, it's a great song in terms of the kids' perspective of what education feels like.
Why don't you repeat that?
It's called, I think it's called "We Don't Need No Education," or it might be called "Another Brick in the Wall" by Pink Floyd, and it's in their album called "The Wall." Basically, we knew that we didn't want anybody to feel like that. We didn't want people to feel anonymous. We didn't want people to feel like they didn't belong. We didn't want people to feel like they were insignificant or that their lives were insignificant. And so we were very, very interested in the idea of community and how the idea of community can support people's sense of themselves and their ability to tap into their natural enthusiasm for learning. And that's really kind of part of the idea of relational education. Is really an educational process where the most important thing in the whole curriculum is the development of a healthy set of relationships among the people in the learning community. That is really what you focused on first and foremost, and that after that you start looking at people's cognitive interests and start helping them to pursue those. But if you don't have the first thing, then what you get out of the second thing is very, very limited. We started off working with students that had dropped out of school, so almost by definition they were not coming from situations where things worked out very well for them, either in school, a lot of times in their families, and often in their communities as well. And they really needed to regain a sense of trust and faith and hope in themselves and in the fact that their lives could really develop into something. Once they had that, then working on the fractions or working on the, Emily Dickinson or working on the social studies, all that was relevant because they had a life that, could go somewhere.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. You are listening to Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski. This is 7:50 a.m. on your radio dial, WAAT Radio. We are here today with Emanuel Pariser from Maine, who's here with a community school in Maine and talking about at-risk students and teen parent programs in Maine at the community school in Maine. Now let's get back to relationships. People out there who are listening will say that you've got probably the most ideal situation with a small group, with adults living in the house. I mean, it's an intensive kind of education and probably the most ideal. However, most school districts aren't able, we heard from you how expensive this is, and most school districts will say that there's no way they can do something like this. How would you answer to that?
Well, I would say that, first of all, that this isn't the only model to achieve outcomes that are positive for the kids that we're talking about. There are a lot of different ways that you can do this. I think part of it would be that you make that shift, which says, what's really important here in this school is going to be how people treat one another, what the relationships are like, and that we can develop authentic and functional relationships between all members of our school community. So teacher to teacher, teacher to student, student to student, the whole thing. I think that can go a long way. And then the second thing is that if we don't provide programs like the community school for the kids that are really out there on the margins, the kids who've had now a history of really not succeeding, we're essentially going to pay much more than what we put in as an investment later on in their struggles, to survive, whether it be in mental health costs or criminal justice costs. we're going to pay many fold over. That's argument number two. Argument number three is that because the school is quick in terms of what it does, that if an average school year, a town has to pay $5,000 to support a kid through high school, and we cut 3 years for somebody down to 1 year, then we've almost evened out the amount of money that would be spent in a situation that wasn't doing the kid any good. So if you took our 1 year $17,000 cost and you pit it against 3 years of high school at $5,000 a year for those kids, you see it comes out pretty close. So those would be my first three responses to it.
Now, this is an intensive learning environment, you said, and obviously a very unique one with the teachers living in with the students. And my thought was it's a real world cause and effect because it basically is a family environment. What kinds of students are these? How do we define at risk? Well, I don't think we've really defined that.
Yes, it's really a really fuzzy term, and I think that you could say that almost all kids are at risk because it's a potential for sort of a future negative outcome that you're talking about. But in most of the literature that I've read that made some sense to me, particularly Hawkins and Catalano, they have risk factor, protective factor models that they've worked out. They just basically say if a student or a person evidences certain set of behaviors, those can be correlated with negative outcomes later in their lives. So dropping out is correlated with substance abuse and with criminal justice problems, and also correlated with lower employment level. It's not a causal effect. You can't say that dropping out causes those things, but in a statistically valid sample of cases, somebody who drops out is more likely to have problems in those areas. And so I think that's what the term at risk really means, is that if you are in a certain kind of situation, you're more likely to have problems in the future if there isn't what they call an intervention in that situation.
Now, we have so many different opinions about what at risk is. People talk, obviously, for the most part, consider at risk kids who are drug addicts or incarcerated individuals or incorrigible and the violent kind of children, the extreme kinds of children. But what you're saying then is that it's not necessarily those extreme children that are at risk.
No, not at all.
What are the common denominators?
Well, I would suggest that some of the common denominators are that if you have a student, a child, or a young adult who has no significant relationships with adults in their lives, that's one common denominator. That, in other words, their relationship with their parents may be kind of shaky, but there's nobody outside of that they really have a connection with. And if they don't feel like they have any area where they really are successful, some area that they can feel proud of that they do, that would be another kind of a correlation. Those would be two things that I think are very, very important. And if they don't feel that they belong anywhere, in other words, if they don't feel a part of anything, all of those three areas would set somebody up for either joining a group of people that was not necessarily very positive, or withdrawing more in a social sense, being more alienated and separated from the adult world that they're very soon going to be a part of.
So these are the kinds of children then, I could think of including myself, many children who fall into those three categories. There's nobody more of a loner than I am, so to speak, or a withdrawing person. I'm kind of shy around people, so that's really doesn't really give me quite a picture of at risk, so to speak. I know hundreds of kids in those three categories.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about a very large percent of youth then, are we?
Well, if you add those, yeah, I actually think you that's true. I think it's true because things have changed so much, Daria, since the 1900s, early 1900s, where we were surrounded by our families, where things weren't as mobile. There's a statistic that just always strikes me as incredibly important, and that is that in 1900, 94% of us lived in walking distance of another adult besides our parents who was related to us. So if we were having trouble in the family, there was always, an uncle and aunt, somebody else that we could go to. And in 1996, I believe the percentage is about 4% of us. So that whole social network has really shrunk.
My goodness, that's a dramatic difference in shift. And you're absolutely right. I came from a background in a family that lived, it was ethnic, that always, and had a very strong culture, that Polish and Italian, if we must project it, and we always met together on Sundays for dinner and did things, and it was very maternal centered, and I mean it was just a very strong community of people. And within one generation, actually, all of my brothers moved to the four corners of the earth, and it's no longer, even the town that we were raised in, all of the young people moved out and moved far away, and basically it's an older community. So what you're saying is absolutely true. Why is this? Why have we come to this? Do you know? Why have we gone from 94% in walking distance to family relative to 4%?
Well, it's a question that I struggle with, and I ask everybody that exact question, and some of the answers that that I've gotten from it are that people. One thing is that the whole work situation has changed, and people's jobs shift a lot, and they often require mobility for people to move around. So for people to work, it's become more necessary for them to be able to pick up and leave somewhere. I talked with my parents about this, and they also felt that they could see people moving out of sort of the nest of their extended relatives so that they could kind of get a fresh start, and they weren't surrounded by people who thought that they knew them. So there was kind of a psychological, an idea that people would, if they had a chance, would leave these small towns and these situations, kind of strike out on their own. That sort of fits in with rugged, American individualism in that sense.
And the smothering effect, and, everybody knows my business in a small town, and I don't want everybody knowing my business, which makes us accountable, and it goes on and on and on, I suppose.
Yes, and I think the people that really suffer from this are the kids.
Yeah. It breeds more isolation. It seems to breed more isolation. So
they don't grow up around it, and, they hardly know who their grandparents are, and they don't have that much more broad-based social, group that they can go to when they're running into trouble. So I think likewise with divorce, I think divorce is probably in some ways positive for the adults that aren't stuck anymore in dysfunctional relationships, but often I think it's tremendously difficult for kids, and it's another huge shift, for kids. So I would say probably 90% of our students come from divorced families, and they're either that's happened a long time ago or it's just happening, and it's a profound change for them to be in that situation. And being a divorced father myself, I know just how powerful that is for kids and the difficulties that poses for them. Now, has traditional education said, wait a minute, here's something we've really got to focus on, because our kids are going through probably the biggest possible trauma they could be going through in some ways, with their parents splitting up and their whole world dissolving. How can somebody, learn fractions under that kind of, I couldn't, So relational learning says, well, yes, the most important thing in your curriculum right now is to deal with those feelings that you have about this, and let's talk about this, and let's let's recognize that it's very hard to, be focusing on these more concrete things when you have a lot of these feelings going on. That's for sure.
And we know from the latest brain-mind research that if a child is in flight, that they are not going to have learning taking place because their mind is occupied and preoccupied. The emotions kick in and take over.
Right.
The mechanism of the brain that allows learning to take place, and therefore children are not able to learn in any capacity whatsoever. And we know that statistically also that the high divorce rate is also giving us children who, in comparison, have very low intelligence scores and test scores. So there's a correlation there, and we really aren't looking at it in terms of the educational factor. Now, your one-on-one relationship basically is what it is. I mean, it's a small group, it's an intimate group, and you are able to deal with the kinds of problems that isolationism and the mobility that we have in our culture today is not dealing with, because literally what happens is when you are in a community like that, the relational aspect means that there's immediate cause and effect. If something goes wrong, if you do something wrong, you immediately have an effect. It has an effect and you have a consequence.
Right.
Whereas in our mobile society and in our educational traditional society today, that cause and effect, for example, if a child does something wrong, they get expelled and have 3 days they are allowed 3 days off of school, literally suspension, and left off for 3 days at school, and or sit home, watch television, and it's not real world cause and effect.
That's right.
But when it's in an intimate relationship like that, it's a whole other ballgame.
Well, it's a really good point. I mean, I think we can probably all look in our own lives, and maybe we could even develop a theory here, Daria, that the more anonymous that you feel in an institution or in a setting, the more latitude you might give yourself to do things that you would never do in a more intimate setting. Like, you go to a restaurant where, like not in your town, somewhere else, and you take some tea bags or something, some extra tea bags, But you would never do that in somebody's kitchen, of a friend or something. Put a bunch of tea bags in your pocketbook, but when you have that anonymous kind of sense, then you give yourself the latitude to do things that are, antisocial, I guess, if you wanted to look at it that way. So that's a wonderful little theory there, that, the more intimate the setting, the more moral the behavior is that people are going to be practicing, because they care about, who they're doing what to, and that is definitely part of what kids learn at the school.
Well, it's not only the caring factor, but it's also the cause and effect. If you do something, it has an effect on me because it may embarrass me, it may put me in jeopardy, it may, so there are other factors that are involved besides caring and even health and safety. So the real-world cause and effect is one of the proponents that I personally look at in terms of trying to look at downgrading schools. That we've talked about this before on my broadcast, that I believe that one of the major factors is that in business, in management, when we have management problems, we downsize, but in schools, we upsize when we have managerial problems.
Oh, good point. Yes, bigger schools does exactly the opposite of what we need.
You've been listening to Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski on WAAT Radio, 750 AM on the dial. Our guest today, Emanuel Pariser, from the community school in Maine that deals with at-risk dropout students and teen parents. You can hear Children Come First every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. on WAAT Radio. The show is produced by Earth Heart Foundation, a nonprofit organization with offices in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and New Mexico. Children Come First is sponsored by CK Auto Supply with locations in Moosic, Scranton, Pittston, and Kingston. You can visit them on the World Wide Web at www.ceekayauto.com. You can contact us at any time. It's 570-639-2931. That's 570-639-2931, or email us at prokids@rlc.net. That's prokids@rlc.net. Join us for the second half hour when we will be talking to Emanuel about some of the students at the at-risk school with Children Come First, and we'll be right back.
As parents, we have to get involved with the school systems, and we have to demand a kind of accountability that nobody seems to be demanding these days in terms of big popular accountability, which isn't a test score accountability, but it's an accountability to really the hearts and the souls of our kids, and having them be feeling good about themselves and feeling capable and feeling like they can do things and interested and curious and all those attributes that we all want for our own children. And that's just not what conventional schooling often sparks in people. And it's I think it can get changed, though, on a local level, bit by bit, piece by piece, if parents are willing to get involved with those systems, if competing systems get set up that are attractive, and kids have choices, then the conventional system may set up alternative programs that are attractive to a wide range of kids and are smaller and are more human-based or relationally based. So that's kind of a long answer to that question, but it's a big question.
Well, I think you're right, and it's really a huge societal, cultural problem. It is not, we tend to blame our children for the problems that we're having, and it is not our children that are to blame, but the fact that we need to rethink and redo the kinds of things that we thought we were doing right. And I mean, there's just so much to do, and I don't know how any 1, 2, or 3 people can do it, but I'm sure with you on our ship here, we can make some changes and see children differently. Unfortunately, what you're asking for in terms of accountability with a child's soul and a child's spirit is not something that can be. How can you demonstrate it? It will be the answer, which is what I hear constantly in terms of schools. And yet, when I'm in prisons, and I spend a lot of time in prisons, I hear inmates who have been in there for 20, 25 years tell me the youths that are coming in today who are committing crimes and violent crimes, to them are scary because they have no conscience and no remorse. And I don't know what we're doing in this society, but it seems the distance, the attachment, the all of the ways that we are raising children, especially in the first 6 years of life, and the fact that we have both mother and father working, we really need to rethink it. And I'm not sure how we're going to change that, but if you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear it.
Well, one thing that you have surely noticed is that when we needed to, we found $10 billion, $10 billion, not 10 million, $10 billion to bomb the Yugoslavians into submission on this last go-around. Now, where did they find this? Did they find it under the desk of the chair of the Senate? Where did this $10 billion come from, and why was that a state of emergency as compared to the fate of kids in inner city schools?
Bravo.
Where did that money come from, and why don't we have the will to say, look, those people are suffering. I don't want to diminish the suffering that was going on in those communities. I have some problems with the tactics because it's hard for me to talk about nonviolence, in schools and then go off and bomb somebody. But even if you set that aside, why don't we have the will to say we need that $10 billion or we need another $10 billion to make schools work for kids?
Or how about the money that the special prosecutor spent on, Ken Starr spent on all of the hearings, the absurdity of what goes on and the money that we spend on the absurdities in this country. What we do is... They're aware
of all this. They see this. They see where the money... They know that teachers,
These are all political games. You have to understand the way things happen. These are all political games. And what we constantly say, and I listen to the commercials on television and laugh, children come first, and yet children really do not come first in our society. It's me, I, and, all the other kinds of things that we spend our money on in this culture.
You got that.
I just saw yesterday's television. I don't remember. I was visiting my father, and I watched the news, and it said, we are at the point in our society of the greatest spending ever in the recorded history. Spending, that means people are buying products. Teenagers were buying Mercedes at an alarming rates, and people are buying houses and rather than saving money, people are using their savings to buy bigger and better houses and more things. And I don't know where this is all going to take us, but it certainly it shows us that the direction of this country is not focused on the soul and spirit, but in the material possessions and how much we have, and the money issues and the career issues.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. That's what people. The thing is that when you have people that have gone through a system and the way that our kids are going through most of the schools that they're in, where their identity, for the majority of them, where their identity isn't supported, that's a perfect situation for them to buy product, to create their identity. So they're going to buy their Nike shoes. I hope I don't offend any of your sponsors, but, they're going to buy their Johnny Hilfiger, whatever, shirts, and that gives them an identity. That makes them a person. Now, you and I know that does not make them a person, And
or wear purple hair and nose rings and earrings and chains hanging and all black, and not that any of these things are wrong. It's just that a child's identity is, as you said, is marked by the kinds of products that they buy. And if I feel bad, what do? And I mean, it's a joke, but people go out and shop if I feel bad, or pop a pill, either one of the two.
So how we switch that around is to try to create communities for ourselves and for our kids where those relational needs that are not getting met and get, and then we become suckers for, the corporate buy.
Marketing
when they
campaigns.
Sell stuff on TV, they don't say, you're a wonderful human being. They say, well, maybe when you go to that date, you smell bad, so you might just need our deodorant or whatever it is. And they set up sort of a low self-esteem situation so they can sell you something that's supposedly going to raise your self-esteem. Well, it might do it temporarily, but it doesn't do a very good job, or at a very profound level, it doesn't do much at all. So if people were raised and in small communities, where they really were known and where they were respected and loved, they wouldn't need those things. And so in that way, it might be kind of bad, for the stock market and for the material world, but I have a feeling it'd be a lot better for the relational world and for the spiritual world that, that are really the keys to our happiness and our productiveness as people.
Well, the universe always has balance, so we found that Joseph Chilton Pierce is a friend of mine, and who wrote Magical Child, and one day Ralph Nader came around and Linda Coco with their new book, Corporate Predators, and we're talking to him about the fact that the 4 major marketing companies were using his book to define the deficiencies of our culture, which were spirituality, the need for parenting, the need for this relational environment. And if they found that what they would do is they would focus on this lack in our society and shift it to buying things and marketing their products.
Exactly.
And in fact, that's exactly what they did. Yeah. Let's get on. You had something to read for us. What was it?
Well, I have actually a couple of letters. Let's just start with one from Brenda Wentworth, who graduated from the school in 1979. And she participated in a conference that we held this May on relational education. She was the student representative on this conference that had really, illustrious people on it, including the president of Northeastern University, Richard Freeland, and Debbie Meyer, and Arnie Langberg from Colorado, and Ron Miller, just a host of pretty amazing people. And when she knew she was going to be on this panel, she agreed to do it. She got very nervous because, she felt like, who was she to be sitting there with all these high muckety-mucks? And then she kind of turned that feeling into this talk that she gave, and I wanted to read part of it to you. So She says, meanwhile, back at the community school, some staff person, this is looking back at her experience at the school, some staff person was deciding to make me her social cause of the year, or so I thought. Yes, I was a bit jaded for such a young one. Anyways, whatever the reason, she took to focusing her love on me. I didn't trust her. I pushed her away with words and behaviors, but she wouldn't budge. She just stayed in my face with that stupid smile on hers and her arms open wide, at a distance, of course, which is all I would allow. Under the gates of my resistance, she slithered. I couldn't seem to defend myself from her insidious persistence. No judgments, no scorn, just gentleness and persistence. She made me crazy, but something inside of me wanted what she was radiating. A hunger burnt deep in me, and I began to give way to it. No matter what asinine behavior I exhibited, she always took the time to comfort me before asking what had happened and why and what could I do differently next time. She was incredible, and I began to love her despite my active attempts to alienate her. Soon I found myself wanting to please her, doing stupid stuff like picking up my cigarette butts in an attempt to get her attention and win her approval. Thank God this was unconscious behavior. She had succeeded where many others had failed. She loved me unconditionally just because I was alive and in her mind deserved a chance. With that, she began to crack my solid steel fortress of rage and despair. This was a feat immeasurable, and my indebtedness follows to this day. So here I find myself a 36-year-old social worker, surprise, surprise, dedicated to meeting other people's fear and resistance with a solid steel fortress of tenderness and persistence, convinced that all educational approaches must be founded in a firm base of love and compassion. To be compassionate, one does not have to buckle under. In fact, one must stand firm in one's conviction and radiate one's truth. Simply radiating truth is all that any of us can really do. This is what I know today.
All I can say is, wow.
Yeah.
That is just extraordinary. Oh, you moved me to tears. Sorry, I capture myself here and bring myself out. That is just so amazing. I mean, how many times does a student really feel a sense of purpose in life and that idea of unconditional love, it's really just amazing. And I was thinking, as parents, most people, I know my children used to say to me, Mom, everybody else's parent is so different than you are. And I said, right, I am not your friend. I'm here to be your mother. I am not your whatever. I'm here to guide you in your way. And I love you no matter what you do, no matter how you do it. And however many mistakes you are, I'll always be here for you no matter what. And, my children got that somehow. Even though they fought me tooth and nail when they were teenagers, I had to stand firm on my ground. But the thing is that we tend to give children so much. We give them so much freedom that we don't give them freedom with a fence around it. They need to have rules. They need to have tough love. They need to know that they can make mistakes and push out and find their way, and we'll still be there for them. And I don't think parents do that in today's world.
That's right. Well, they don't have time because they both have to work. And and there are these other things like TV and things which sort of soak up some of that time that used to be family time, homework, and a lot of things. And one of the things that Brenda was saying here, I think that really struck me was, and Debbie Meyer made a point of it later in the program or earlier in the program, was that for those of us that work with kids like Brenda was. Who are tough, who are resistant, who are angry, who are furious, with everybody, including themselves. We have to like them for who they are right now, not this idea of, well, they've got a lot of potential,
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Just love them for who they are, and if you can't do that, then you shouldn't be in the business.
And, teaching has taken us so far away from that. Teachers in general, I mean, they have so many students in high school. They have 200, 300, 400 students at a time. How are they able to give that kind of affection and love and understanding to a student? I mean, we're talking nitty-gritty here. We're not just talking about giving somebody some a pat on the back, or, I mean, our children need our time, is what you're saying, and they need our ability to be able to focus on them and give them our time and our energy. And if we've got so many students in the classroom and we are parents who have so many other things to do, I mean, even parents with good intentions who are keeping their kids busy, from going to school all day to sports every night and running them around on weekends, what you're saying is that really is not the kind of life that they really are asking us for.
I have a great story. I'm just reading Chris Mercogliano's text for his next book on Ritalin.
Oh, yeah, I helped him with some of that.
Yeah, on attention deficit disorder. And but the best definition by far for me of that problem was given to me by a student who was talking about how she just craved attention from other people. And so we were talking about why do you need to be with other people so much, or why and where has this led you, and then problems with relationships or hooking up with people that weren't very good for her. And she says, I have attention deficit disorder. She says, I never got enough attention in my life. And I thought, yeah, that's it. That's it. That's a great definition.
That's I love it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. Did you give that to Chris?
I'm going to write it on his manuscript.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and I think if you don't get attention, it's hard to pay attention. So,
And that's absolutely appropriate in terms of modeling. I mean, we saw the poem on children live what you give them. We have it everywhere in our culture, and yet we really aren't paying attention to it. That's perfect, absolutely perfect. You're listening to Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski on WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. Our guest today is Emanuel Pariser. He's from the community school in Camden, Maine. We're talking about at-risk students who have dropped out of school, teen parents, and what we can do to help our children in society for the next century. Now, you were continuing, Jeff. Emanuel. I'm sorry.
No, I had another story at the conference that we held. We had a former student talking about how at a certain point in her adolescence, she felt that her life didn't have any meaning, and that when she came to the school, all of a sudden, she started feeling that sense creeping back in that her actual life did have meaning. And I was just so struck by that, because when I was a teenager, I wasn't sure if life had meaning, but it was like an abstract, sort of existential, does life have meaning? What does this all mean? But I never had any doubt that my life had some meaning. And here was somebody telling me that when they walked in the door, they weren't really sure that their life had any meaning. And you think about that, if you put yourself into the mind of a person who feels like their life doesn't have any meaning, why would you do anything positive?
Exactly. You wanted to also speak about teachers and how to encourage teachers in relational-based education. How can we do that?
Well, one of the things that we've experienced is about 82% actually of our students, former dropouts, some dropped out in 9th grade, some dropped out in 12th grade, have gotten their high school diplomas, and about 40% have gone on to colleges, which is about the average in the state of Maine for kids going on to college. And this was done in a 6-month program, not 4 years of school. And one of the things that it implies to me is that all of this structure that we've set up of 16 years of school leading to the knowledge sufficient to go to college and lead a productive life, is that's baloney. It's totally arbitrary. And that when people's deeper needs get met, their relational needs get met, when they feel like they're a person, when they feel like their life has meaning, then they can do the cognitive stuff, and they have the will to get through the stuff that's difficult. So if teachers would take the time and focus on that, on developing that matrix of relationships, as Chris called it in his book, with the kids in their classes, and cut out time from the cognitive, XYZ curriculum that you have to cover 300 pages of in the year, they would find that their students would do fine on all those standardized tests of knowledge, and that's my firm faith and belief based on 25 years of experience working with kids who were not doing fine at all in a traditional school. So I think we're hardwired, and I think your friend Joseph Pierce would agree with that. We're hardwired to learn. That's our basic. Human beings are a learning animal, and if we create a safe and nurturing environment, that's what people will do with it. So you don't have to worry about covering page 1 to 350 in the biology text. That stuff will take care of itself if the human being that you're working with, appreciates their own humanness and other people's humanness as well.
I think that's a very different perception than what teachers normally consider. However, it's very difficult as a teacher. I know I was in the classroom. I work for the public school system. I work for private schools. And in order to keep one's job, one has to cover a certain amount of material. So and from traveling around and doing training programs with teachers, I don't think it's the teachers that we need to convince. I think it's from them in the pyramid structure all the way up, for the principals to the superintendents to the school boards to the legislators it's really the hierarchy that's making the recommendations for what's happening on the way down, and people do not or will not consider the kinds of things that you're talking about here today, and I don't know how we can change those attitudes.
One way that's very interesting that's been pioneered by Arnie Langberg and the Colorado Mountain Open School is their process of passages, and our program for teen parents is actually an adaptation of that model. And what that
the walkabout?
Yeah, the walkabout model. And what that it requires is that for a student to graduate, they have to do 6 passages, which involves something like a committee that you would go to for your doctorate, a thesis committee. And you create a project, and then this thesis committee works with you on it and approves or disapproves it. Now, what's really great about this is that on the committee are members of the community, people that are experts, perhaps, in the field that you're studying. And when you involve members of the community who actually form the base of these, the legislation that comes out in some ways, and they see what's involved in really assessing a piece of work or assessing whether somebody knows something, and they see how complicated it is and how messy it is, but how important it is to be doing that rather than through a set of multiple choice questions, to actually be sitting there and listening to somebody give a presentation on something and ask them about, what about this, or could they explain this further. That's true community accountability, much more than test scores. And so if we could shift the discussion from what schools are cranking out what test scores for what kids to what schools have the greatest participation of the community, in the assessment and in the actual vital workings of the school. You would find those schools, I think, with teachers that felt much freer to concentrate on some of the stuff that's really important that gets neglected. And their school boards, obviously, would be elected, to represent that point of view. So that's one thought I have about that. Bring the community into the assessment process.
We have about 4 more minutes to go. Can you give us a summary, and would you like to do a little wrap-up on what we've talked about today and what you'd like to leave our audience with?
Sure. Well, I'm delighted. I really appreciate your giving me a chance to talk with you about these topics. It's very, very close to my heart to provide our children, and particularly our teenagers, with a chance to grow into adults who have hope and are not bound by despair, and who see a future for themselves. And one of the ways that we've found to do that at the community school is to give them responsibility, give them a nurturing, safe situation, and to create real and human relationships between us and them, and create a learning community that can support the very best aspects of who they are as human beings. And there's no magic, there's no special passwords, there's no trick to this. It takes time and it takes courage on the part of the students and on the part of the teachers to be involved in real intimate human interactions. But the benefits are huge. And we're very, very happy and proud of many of our graduates who have gone on to do wonderful things, and who look back at the school as kind of a basis for the kind of a rebirth for themselves. And I would love to see that opportunity being extended, to more kids, and also would offer the school as an internship site for teachers or people that are thinking about getting into teaching with a particular perspective to working on relational learning and some of these things that we've been talking about. So, thanks for having me on the show.
And basically, relational learning is an everyday skill of communication, learning to listen. I mean, we really didn't go over the kinds of skills that you're talking about with regard to relational learning, but those are the kinds of things that you mean: mediation, between win-win situations rather than win-lose, where everybody has a say. There are so many skills that are involved in relational learning that are appropriate for students to learn and that they don't learn because of the non-traditional, non-extended family that exists anymore, and the lack of community spirit.
That's right.
And also, I wanted to say, you talked briefly about how can we possibly have a high expectation for our students and our children in environments that are not cultivating and able to breed the kinds of children that we are requiring them to be. We are literally planting seeds in an acidic environment and expecting them all to grow. And it's just too much to ask for our children. We need to have nurturing environments, caring environments where we water them, give them sunshine, and give them the opportunity to grow instead of creating all this pressure and stress and strain for them in terms of attempting to grow in the kinds of situations they are in. I want to thank you for joining us, Emanuel. I really appreciate that you're taking your time out from your summer vacation.
Oh, we're in session. So.
Oh, you're still in session.
Oh, yeah,
okay.
We go right through the summer.
Oh, okay. You have been listening to Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski on WAAT Radio 750 AM on your radio dial. Our guest today was Emanuel Pariser from the community school in Camden, Maine, that deals with at-risk dropout students and teen parents. You can hear Children Come First every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. on WAAT Radio. The show is produced by Earth Heart Foundation, a nonprofit organization with offices in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and New Mexico. We are sponsored by CK Auto Supply, with locations in Moosic, Scranton, Pittston, and Kingston. You can visit them on the World Wide Web at www.ceekayauto.com. You can contact us at any time at 570-639-2931. That's 570-639-2931. If you'd like any information on any of our guests or any of the products that we talked about, or if you'd like to have us have some guest on at a future date, or you can email us at prokids@rlc.net. That's PROKIDS@rlc.net. Join us again next Tuesday at WAAT. It's 10 a.m. for Children Come First. This is Dr. Daria Brzezinski. Have a great day and have a wonderful week, and hug your kids.